Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. It's the opening verse of the Battle Hymn of the Republic by Julia Ward Howe. It's also used as one of the most famous novels in American literature, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from Revelation chapter 14. Now, there is a ton of stuff going on here, and we won't be able to cover it all. Two things I'd like to say. One is, when I first read through the book of Revelation, the thing that probably frightened me the most was the mark of the beast on the head and the hand. Like, what is that? Is that like a barcode? Is that a chip somebody's going to insert in my head or my wrist and there's nothing I can do about it? Well, let me simply say the mark of the beast is counteracted by the mark of the Lamb. So we see in the opening of this chapter, for example, I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion with the 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. Basically, John is saying the mark on the forehead is what is in your mind? Where does your identity based? Have you identified yourself as a follower of Jesus Christ? Or have you identified yourself with, in this case, we're introduced to the whore of Babylon? Are you a part of the bride of Christ or the things of the world? What fills your mind? What occupies your thoughts and your time? The other part of that is the hand, which is what do you find yourself doing? Are your actions motivated towards following the Lamb? And here it reminds me of Mary Had a Little Lamb. We see that this group, they follow everywhere that the Lamb goes, or they rebel against the Lamb. Are we following after God with our thoughts and our actions or not? And that gets into the whole grapes of wrath piece. God ultimately is in charge, and we've talked about this roller coaster going up and down, and we're hanging on for dear life here. Ultimately, John is saying, look, it's going to be really difficult, and we see the wine of God's fury and all of this. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow. As hard as it's going to be, know that hanging with the Lord, with the Lamb, is ultimately the safe place for us to be. Since I talked about Julia Ward Howe, kind of the Civil War era, she grew up in a Calvinist home, as did Abraham Lincoln, who, this is a part of what I think is the greatest speech by a politician in American history, Lincoln's second inaugural address. And he says this: if we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives both to North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, meaning slavery and everything that went with it, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? In other words, God is just, and why won't he bring justice on the earth for everything that we've done? Fondly do we hope, and fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled up by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As it was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Be nice if we had inaugural addresses that sounded like that today, wouldn't it? Friends, know that we can follow the Lord and have his mark on our head and on our hands, and ultimately his truth is marching on. Here's the last verse from Julia Ward Howe's Battle Hymn of the Republic, not published at the time, but this is how she wrote it. He is coming like the glory of the morning on the wave. He is wisdom to the mighty. He is succor to the brave. So the world shall be his footstool and the soul of time his slave. Our God is marching on. God bless you today.